At 5:43 on a wet Thursday in March, the fourth-floor atrium of Halcyon Biologics looked less like a factory than a private bank that had learned to sterilize itself. The limestone tiles had been buffed before dawn. A wall of glass looked over the river and the freight tracks beyond it, all silver in the rain. Inside, the air carried the clean, medicinal bite of isopropyl alcohol and citrus polish. Someone from facilities had arranged white orchids along the reception desk because the German engineering team was due at 6:30, and the site vice president wanted the place to look like capital, not labor. Lena Ortiz, 37, a sanitation and line clearance associate on the sterile fill floor, stepped into that polished space in navy scrub pants and a gray fleece that had lost its shape at the elbows. Her hair was pinned back with the kind of efficiency that came from doing it in a dark kitchen while a child ate toast beside her. In one hand, she carried a clear vinyl tote with her badge, nitrile gloves, a cracked phone, and her daughter's yellow lunchbox, the one with faded planets on the lid and a zipper pull repaired with blue thread. She had forgotten to take it out after the school run. It made her look, in that room, like someone who had wandered in from the wrong life. Graham Vale, the site vice president, turned from the reception desk just as she crossed the marble strip by the elevators. He wore a charcoal suit, a white pocket square, and the thin expression of a man already exhausted by other people. "Not through here," he said, not loudly, but loudly enough. "Service traffic uses the south corridor." A few people heard him. One of the visiting consultants smiled into her coffee. Two senior managers looked away. Near the sign-in desk, Noor El Masri, a junior QA associate with a tablet tucked to her chest, glanced from Lena to the lunchbox and then back again. Lena stopped because stopping was faster than explaining. "I'm on line clearance for 4 West. Vale's gaze dropped to the lunchbox. "Then you know where 4 West is." There was a small laugh from someone behind him. Not cruel enough to be memorable to them. Exact enough to be memorable to her. She might have walked on, and usually she did. But as the elevator doors opened, a stainless transfer cart rolled past toward the gowning airlock, draped in white Tyvek hoods, and Lena saw the lower left corner of the nearest hood lift inward for half a second, not out. A breath pulled the wrong way. Almost nothing. The sort of thing most people never noticed because they trusted numbers on screens more than fabric at the edge of air. Nobody in that room understood what she had already seen. She shifted the lunchbox higher in the clear tote, stepped aside, and let the cart pass. By the time the Germans arrived, the people who had laughed would be the first to go silent. 4 West had no windows. The sterile fill corridor was a sequence of interlocked rooms divided by pressure, protocol, and memory. There were places where you could speak normally and places where your voice lowered without permission. Lena knew the floor by the way each zone sounded through a mask. The softened drone of the vial washer, the clipped hiss of compressed air at the stopper feeder, the deeper turbine note from the isolator ventilation when it was balanced correctly. She knew which hinges had to be closed with a hand on the latch and which carts drifted left because one wheel had been damaged and never replaced. She knew whose handwriting turned sharper when batch pressures were bad and which supervisor signed too quickly when production was late. At 5:58, she badged into the pre-gowning room, stowed the lunchbox in her locker, checked her hairnet in the mirror, and began what the SOP called line clearance verification for the Norexin pediatric fill campaign, Batch 2, 4-0314A. The task sounded simple to people who had never stood under cove lighting with a pen light and a checklist while an entire plant leaned on the clock. It meant confirming that the line was free of any remnants from the previous batch. No leftover labels trapped under guide rails, No cartons, no batch records, no stray caps, no paper fibers, no unlogged tools, no fragments under the capper star wheel, no residue in the feed bowls, no mismatched lot numbers on printed inserts, no old product placards in the bin docks. It meant making sure that a mistake from yesterday had no legal path into today. The plant called people like Lena floor workers because titles flattened nicely when they moved downward. Her official role required dual sign-off with QA, but most days the production supervisors treated her like a mop with a badge. They forgot that the line could not open until she and QA released it. They forgot that every recall began as something minor that someone ordinary had been expected not to notice. Noor met her outside the line with a binder tucked under one arm and an apologetic look she hadn't earned. She was 26, precise, eager, and still new enough to think institutions mostly meant what they printed on walls. "Morning," she said through her mask. "I've got the revised checklist." "Revision 6 or 7? Lena asked. Noor checked the corner. 7. The batch packet on the desk said 6. Noor's eyebrows moved. "I thought they swapped it at midnight." Lena took the packet, flipped the cover page, and saw the old footer, still marked Revision 6, with a fresh signature sticker placed across the lower right corner. "They didn't swap everything?" Noor frowned. "Do you want me to hold?" "Not yet." Lena set the packet down and continued with the physical inspection, but she marked the inconsistency in the margin with the neat, compressed handwriting she had kept since college, because it took less room and gave away less mood. They worked room by room. Product contact parts had arrived from sterilization under intact Tyvek hoods inside autoclavable bags. The fill needles were staged. The stopper bowl had been wiped and logged. Passive settle plates still sealed in their sleeves waited in the tray for setup monitoring. The pressure monitor on the wall showed a clean green bar at 15 pascals between the grade C corridor and the open isolator zone. Exactly where it should have been. Exactly. Lena paused in front of the display longer than Noor did. The number was steady enough to be decorative. No 2 hours of a live facility were that still. Not with personnel movements, door cycles, washer discharge, and ventilation load changing room by room. "You okay?" Noor asked. Lena looked at the screen, then at the lower latch on the transfer hatch where maintenance had changed the gasket 3 nights earlier. There was the faintest crescent of gray powder at the edge of the metal lip, caught where a cloth could miss it and still say cleaned. "Who replaced the hatch seal?" "Maintenance. Why?" "It was red-tagged Tuesday." "I know." Noor lowered her voice. "They said it was non-critical. Vale wants the engineering visit clean." That was how things got named when people had decided not to see them. Non-critical, cosmetic, administrative, operator handling, housekeeping. Lena resumed the inspection. Inside the isolator access area, she watched a tech position a hooded component tray. When the washer tunnel cycled down the corridor, she saw it again. The lower edge of Tyvek shivered inward, toward the critical zone, then settled. A tiny reverse pulse. Small enough to disappear if you believed the monitor. She made a note. Time, location, washer discharge coincident, left lower transfer hatch, inward movement of hood edge. Noor watched her write. "You've seen that before." 3 times this week. Did you escalate?" Lena gave her a look over the top of her mask. "I wrote it in the deviation comments." And operations changed the category from airflow concern to cleaning observation. Noor's eyes widened, then narrowed as if she had just recognized a shape in a picture she had been told was abstract. "Who did that?" "Who usually does." At 6:19, Graham Vale came through the corridor with 2 production managers and a consultant from the acquisition team. Even behind shoe covers, he moved like carpet belonged to him. He took in the line status board, the setup progress, Lena and Noor at the checklist station, and the comment box open on the tablet. "We are not opening deviations this morning," he said. Noor stiffened. "It's not open yet." Vale addressed Lena, which he rarely did directly unless displeased. "You can finish your clearance and leave the engineering discussion to the engineers. There's a pressure anomaly at the left transfer hatch." "There's a schedule," he said. "And there is a difference. The sensor's too flat. We are not crowdsourcing manufacturing science." His gaze cut briefly to Noor, making the lesson public. "If you have a housekeeping concern, tell your supervisor and move on." Lena stood still. That was one of the things people mistook for submission in her. They saw the stillness and thought they had won. In truth, it was the visible part of an internal inventory. What had been said, by whom, in front of whom, and what would matter later. "It isn't housekeeping," she said. He smiled then, but without warmth. "On this floor, Ms. Ortiz, everything you touch is housekeeping." Noor looked down. One of the production managers pretended to review the setup board. The consultant from the acquisition team made a private note on his phone. Lena signed the bottom of the clearance form where her part was complete and closed the binder. "Then you may want to ask housekeeping why your pressure differential only fails when the washer unloads." Vale's face changed by 1/2 degree. It was enough. He left without answering. The ordinary part of Lena's day began long before dawn and never really ended at the plant. Her daughter Marisol was 9, sharp-faced, solemn in the morning, funny only after dinner, and old enough to understand that bills were something adults tried not to let children hear through walls. Lena woke at 4:12, packed the yellow lunchbox with cut strawberries, a cheese roll, and 2 crackers Marisol liked only if they were the square kind, not the round ones. She checked the school app for messages, braided a head of hair that always came loose by recess, answered emails from no one important, and drove 12 minutes to her neighbor's apartment to leave Marisol there for the bus. The neighbor, Mrs. Baines, had arthritic hands and a strict love of punctuality. Lena paid her on Fridays in cash because it saved embarrassment. She took the early shift because it got her home in time for pickup, and because hourly rolls on the sterile floor came with overtime, differential, and health coverage without travel. The salaried job sat higher in the org chart and lower in the life she was able to sustain. Salaried people stayed late when systems failed. They flew to vendor sites. They joined calls at 10:30 at night with Europe on speakerphone. They had the luxury of being needed everywhere. Lena had a child who needed her in one place, at the same time, every day, regardless of whether a line ran or a manager performed urgency. People at Halcyon knew pieces of this in the way workplaces know and distort. They knew she was a single mother. They knew she had started on sanitation instead of production. They knew she kept better notes than some supervisors and never wasted a sentence. They knew she had turned down an internal promotion to second shift lead because the hours changed week to week. They did not know, because she never told them, that she had once written protocol deviations in English and Spanish for a sterile injectables plant in Barceloneta, or that she could read a smoke study video with the same attention other people reserved for weather maps, or that the reason she had stopped aiming upward was not lack of ability, but the arithmetic of custody, health insurance, and exhaustion. By 7:04, the German team had arrived. Lena knew because security announced them over the sterile floor channel, and because the plant's rhythm changed in the way it always did when foreign expertise entered American management culture. A sudden deepening of posture, voices dropping into prepared professionalism, sentences becoming cleaner and slightly false. The team came from Heisler Anlagenbau, the machine manufacturer that had built Halcyon's new isolator-based filling line. They had 3 engineers and 1 application specialist. Their lead was Matthias Reuter, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, with the dry face of a man who had spent his life distrusting easy explanations. With him was Anja Vogel, younger, exact, carrying a case the size of a violin, and moving with the efficient impatience of someone who had already read everyone's notes and found them thin. So Lena did not see them first. She heard about them from Noel Santos in maintenance, who leaned into the corridor where she was wiping down the external support frame. "You're famous," he said. She looked up. "That seems unlikely." "They asked for you." "Who did?" "The Germans." She straightened. "Why?" Noel shrugged. "By name, in the conference room. I was there to explain the hatch seal replacement, and the old guy opens the compiled deviation packet and says, 'Before we begin, where is Lena Ortiz?'" For a second, Lena thought he was joking, but Noel had the rattled expression of a man who would have preferred to be invisible. "What packet?" "The cross-functional summary QA sent them. Your comments are all over it." Nora appeared at the end of the corridor, almost at a half-run despite sterile protocols, eyes wide over her mask. "They really did," she said. "Vale looked like he swallowed a battery." Lena wiped her gloves with sterile alcohol out of habit. "What exactly did they ask?" Nor lowered her voice. "Matthias said your observations were the only ones tied to timestamps and door cycles. He wants you in the troubleshooting review." "Vale won't like that." "He already doesn't." Nor had never spoken like that about leadership before. It made Lena almost smile. The conference room overlooking the atrium had been staged with bottled water, printed agendas, and the good pastries from a bakery across the river, the ones Vale reserved for board visits. Lena entered in her cleanroom underscrubs and plant coat, because that was what she had been wearing when she was summoned. Her hair was still covered. She had no notebook except the spiral-bound pocket pad she used on the floor. The room went momentarily quiet when she stepped in. Matthias Reuter stood. "Ms. Ortiz?" "Yes." He extended his hand as if there were no strangeness in the fact that the only person in PPE in the room was also the one he had asked to see. "Thank you for coming. We read your event comments. They are more useful than most of the formal report." That landed in the room harder than praise. Vale's jaw tightened. Noor, seated at the far end with QA, looked up openly now. Lena took the offered hand. They were just observations. "That is what engineering begins with," Anja said. Matthias opened the packet. On the screen at the end of the table appeared a table of minor events from the previous 3 weeks. Gloveport fogging, intermittent microstop on stopper feed, 2 environmental monitoring alerts later closed as non-actionable, 1 maintenance work order on the left transfer hatch, 1 repeated note on irregular Tyvek movement during setup. Most of the comments were vague. Operator noticed issue. Resolved by reset. No product impact. Continue monitoring. Then there were hers. March 9th, 0551. Lower edge of hood lifts inward during washer unload. Pressure display remained static. March 11th, 0603. Same event after hatch gasket replacement. Faint ozone odor near left latch. March 13th, 0547. Settle plate position, front left dries unevenly after setup. Possible local airflow disturbance. Recommend physical check, not monitor reliance. Matthias tapped the screen. Who changed the classification from airflow concern to cleaning observation? No one answered quickly enough. Vale cleared his throat. We triaged based on existing instrumentation and overall environmental trends. The pressure cascade remained within spec. According to the display? Anja said. Yes. And the display was independently verified after seal replacement? A pause. Noel Santos, seated near the wall, said carefully, The transducer line was not recalibrated because the work order was closed as like for like. Was it like for like? Matthias asked. Noel looked at Vale first. That was answer enough. Lena said, "The replacement gasket is thicker." Every head in the room turned toward her, including some that had never really looked at her before. "How do you know?" the acquisition consultant asked, as if the question itself contained disbelief. "I clean around it," Lena said. "The latch closes harder, and the Tyvek catches on the lower lip. It didn't before Tuesday." Anya leaned back. "Good." Vale tried to regain the room. "This is precisely why we invited Heisler in, to resolve speculation with data." Lena did not look at him. "Then take a smoke source to the left hatch during washer discharge and see which way the air moves." Matthias smiled once, briefly. "Yes, we will do exactly that." It should have ended there, with the hierarchy adjusted and the issue moved into technical hands. But institutions rarely surrendered that cleanly. Vale wanted the line released for a demonstration fill by late morning because the acquisition team from Boston was on site, and because the Norexin campaign mattered to Halcyon's valuation. Pediatric oncology was the kind of phrase investors said with solemn faces and aggressive forecasts. The product had already been delayed once after a media fill failure. Another hold, especially one traceable to local maintenance and deviation handling, would not just cost hours. It would expose a culture. The problem with cultures was that the people who benefited from them called them pressure. At 8:12, the troubleshooting team gathered at the line. Matthias and Anya had smoke tubes, a handheld manometer, and the calm manner of people used to discovering that the machine was not the only variable. Noor brought the batch records and environmental monitoring map. Noel from maintenance carried the hatch drawings. Vale came too, along with the production director, Elise Bannon, a woman with lacquered restraint and a talent for making risk sound personal. Lena stood slightly back until Matthias motioned her forward. Show us the sequence." She did. Washer unload, component cart staging, door open, hood position, timing against the corridor traffic. She did not dramatize. She simply placed bodies where they usually stood, described what she had seen, and asked one of the operators to repeat the motion. Anya positioned a smoke tube near the lower left corner of the transfer hatch, while the washer completed its cycle. The pressure display on the wall remained a confident green. 15 pascals, stable. Then the smoke bent inward, not much, just enough. A thin gray stream drawn toward the critical zone at the exact corner Lena had recorded. Nobody spoke for a second. "Again," Matthias said. They repeated it. Same result. Anya checked the manometer at the physical port. Her eyes sharpened. "Display is damped, or actual differential is dropping during washer unload." Noel went pale. "That's not possible unless the sensing line is pinched or obstructed," Anya finished. Lena pointed to the cable run behind the access panel. "They rerouted it when they changed the seal." Noel pulled the panel and found the tubing compressed behind a bracket. A simple, stupid thing. The kind that happened when a job was rushed and closed by someone told it was minor. Elise Bannon said, "We can correct the tubing and continue." "No," Lena said before anyone else could. A few heads snapped toward her, reflexively offended. Matthias looked at her, not them. "Why no?" "Because that isn't the only problem." Vale exhaled through his nose. "This is not your call." "No," Matthias said evenly. But I asked the question." Lena stepped closer to the hatch and pointed to the lower seal where a faint drag mark showed in the stainless. The thicker gasket changed the closure force. It's not seating evenly on the lower corner. The Tyvek catches because the edge is proud by maybe 2 millimeters. When the washer unload changes corridor pressure, the weak corner takes the pull first. Fixing the sensor only lets you see the failure in real time. Noel ran a gloved finger along the seat and stopped. Damn. He looked at Vale again, then at the floor. Matthias asked for a feeler strip, checked the seal himself, and nodded. She is right. Anya opened her case and took out calipers. The gasket dimension was off-spec. The acquisition consultant quietly stepped back from the line, as if distance might protect him from what he had just learned. Vale's voice hardened. We don't have evidence of product impact. This line hasn't released commercial product yet. No commercial release, Noor said, surprising herself as much as anyone else. But environmental monitoring from the last media fill had an unexplained front left count. We closed it as isolated because the instrumentation showed stable differential. Anja turned. Show me. Noor did. She had the map already tabbed. The room changed then, not in noise, but in loyalty. People began looking at source documents instead of management faces. Noel forgot to pretend. The operators edged nearer. Even Elise stopped smoothing language and started asking actual questions. Once a system loses its shared fiction, it can unravel very fast. Lena could feel it happening and did not enjoy it. That was another thing people misunderstood about competence. They imagined it produced satisfaction. Most of the time, it produced work. Matthias ordered the line placed on hold pending gasket replacement, sensor reroute, repeated smoke study, and deviation escalation. Vale objected that corporate needed a timeline before noon. Matthias replied that corporate could have a timeline after they had truth. Then the situation became worse. Noor, flipping through the electronic event history while the hold was being entered, froze at the workstation. Lena, she said quietly. Lena went to her. On the screen was the maintenance closure on the hatch seal change. The original work order had been opened as a deviation impacting repair requiring QA assessment and recalibration. 2 hours later, someone with elevated permissions had revised the classification to routine maintenance. The approval trail showed Graham Vale's credentials authorizing the reclassification after midnight. Noor looked sick. I didn't know. Lena believed her. Matthias saw their faces and came over. When he understood, he said nothing for a moment. Then he asked the only useful question. Who else has this access? Site leadership, Noor said. Vale had moved closer now, reading the silence too late. That work order was administratively corrected. The repair was minor. Minor repairs do not change gasket profile and pinch sensing lines, Anya said. It was done to avoid procedural delay while we assessed operational impact. That is another phrase for bypassing quality, Noor said. Her voice shook, but it did not disappear. Everyone heard that. Even the operators in the back. There are moments in workplaces when rank still exists but stops functioning. This was one. Vale could not scold Noor without making the truth louder. He could not overrule Matthias without making the manufacturer an adversary. He could not call Lena unqualified now that every technical point she had raised stood in stainless steel in front of him. So he reached for the oldest available refuge. We can discuss process afterward. Right now, we need containment. Lena looked at the open work order, the recalibration requirement that had been stripped away. The batch clock still counting toward a schedule that should never have existed, and felt something inside her settle into a colder shape. Not outrage, recognition, because now the story was familiar, not the equipment, the structure. Years earlier, on an island floor where humidity moved differently and the ocean lived in every metal seam, she had learned that people under pressure did not first ignore what mattered. They renamed it. They thinned it out with vocabulary until it could pass through meetings undetected. A leak became a variance. A variance became an observation. An observation became a note attached to someone ordinary enough to disregard. She had been 28 then, newly promoted, running qualification protocols at Caribe Sterile Solutions in Barceloneta. Proud in a careful way, not yet a mother. Not yet acquainted with the cost of being needed by both a process and a child. She had trained on isolator lines, written deviations, fought with vendors, and once spent 14 hours proving that a smoke study video everyone else had approved actually showed eddying behind a glove port. People listened then because her title told them to. Then came the hurricane, the shutdown, the months afterward when the plant never fully reopened, followed by the smaller private collapse that mattered more. Her husband, who had been tender when the future was easy and unreliable when it became expensive, left 2 weeks after Marisol's first kidney surgery, taking the better car and most of the silence in the apartment with him. He sent texts for a while, then excuses, then less. The engineer Lena had been did not vanish in one cinematic fall. She was reduced by rent, insurance forms, pediatric nephrology appointments, a mother in another city, a move north to where an old classmate said there were openings in sterile manufacturing if she did not mind starting below her resume. She minded. She took it anyway. The job at Halcyon was supposed to be temporary. 6 months in sanitation and line support while she rebuilt contacts, renewed certifications, found stable childcare, slept long enough to sound ambitious again in interviews. Then Marisol needed specialists in Philadelphia. Then school schedules hardened into survival architecture. Then temporary became compatible, and compatible became necessary. People stopped asking what Lena had done before. She stopped volunteering it. A lower title, she learned, was not just smaller pay. It was social camouflage. You could hear what people really thought around someone they had already ranked. That was why she noticed things. Not because suffering made her gifted, because invisibility gave her time to look. Back on 4 West, the hold spread through the plant with institutional speed. Electronic statuses flipped red. A quality review was called. Corporate counsel joined by video. The acquisition people disappeared into a side room. Someone from HR came looking for Vale and then thought better of it. Operators who had spent 3 weeks being told to reset minor issues without drama began, cautiously, to say what else they had seen. A harder latch, an odd tug at the hood, a pressure number that never seemed to twitch. The room where the immediate review took place was smaller than the polished conference room downstairs and less forgiving. No orchids, no pastries, just a monitor, 6 chairs, and the fatigue that arrives when everyone realizes the documented version of events has already failed. Lena sat at the end of the table because that was where there was space. Nor sat beside her now, without hesitation. Matthias and Anya occupied the far side with their notes. Noel from maintenance looked as though he had aged since sunrise. Elise Bannon kept her hands folded too tightly. Vale arrived last. Corporate asked for chronology. For once, chronology favored the least powerful person in the room. Lena had timestamps, nor had document revisions. The physical evidence sat on the line in sealed observation photos. The smoke test video showed the direction of air more honestly than any argument. When it was her turn to speak, Lena did not expand the story. She described what she saw, when she saw it, where she recorded it, and how the classifications changed after submission. She did not speculate about motives. She did not mention the atrium or the service corridor or the sentence about housekeeping. Humiliation often wanted to be narrated. Dignity rarely required it. A lawyer on the call asked, "Ms. Ortiz, What is your technical background for these observations? The question had teeth in it, credentials finally, when her warnings had not needed them. Before Lena could answer, Matthias said, "Enough to be correct." The silence after that was not accidental. It was a choice on behalf of the room, and a few people understood what it meant. "Still," she answered. "Process validation and aseptic setup. Previous employer in Puerto Rico. Sterile injectables." The lawyer said, "And your current role?" Lena looked at the monitor. The role that noticed. Noor stared at the table to hide the sudden shine in her eyes. By early afternoon, the formal consequences had begun. The deviation was recategorized as major pending further impact assessment. The batch was held. Environmental review expanded to prior media fill data. Maintenance records for the previous month were frozen. Vale was asked to step out of the quality review pending internal investigation. No one announced discipline, but systems had a way of doing that later in quieter rooms. He crossed Lena once more outside the review area, while waiting for security to escort a document transfer. Without the conference room audience, and without the plant performing confidence for visitors, he looked smaller, though still expensively assembled. "I hope you understand what this delay will cost," he said. It was a weak line, borrowed from a world in which cost only moved upward. Lena adjusted the strap of her coat. "I know exactly what contamination costs." He started to reply, then seemed to realize that there was no version of the conversation in which he could sound aggrieved and not ridiculous. He walked away. Noor found Lena an hour later in the break room, where the coffee was always burnt after lunch, and the fluorescent light made everyone look briefly unforgiven. Lena had her phone on the table, answering a message from Mrs. Baines that Marisol had forgotten her library book again. "I read your HR file," Noor blurted, then winced. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. It was attached to an old internal transfer request." Lena set the phone down. And? And I didn't know." Noor sat across from her. "About the engineering background. About why you declined lead. About your daughter." "Most people don't." Noor pressed her lips together. "That seems obscene." Lena almost laughed. "It's just work." "No," Noor said quietly. "It's what work lets people get away with." For a moment, they were both silent. In another life, Lena thought, she might have supervised someone like Noor. She might have taught her how to read a room without surrendering to it. How to document before you argue. How to know when a system could be corrected and when it had to expose itself first. Instead, she said, "You did the right thing today." "I was late to it." "You were in it." Noor nodded, accepting the smaller mercy. The rest of the afternoon was procedural in the way genuine consequences usually are. There were photos, CAPA drafts, equipment hold tags, revised risk statements, and a second smoke study after the hatch was reopened for documentation. There was also, unexpectedly, something close to respect moving through the floor. Not dramatic. No one applauded. But operators who had once waved Lena past as background now stopped her to ask what she thought of the reroute. Noel asked whether she would review the replacement install before final closure. Anya requested copies of Lena's original comments for Heisler's own field feedback because, she said, plants often send us narratives. You sent observations. At 4:37, after the third review call, and a confirmed plan for gasket replacement by validated spec, Matthias found Lena near the gowning room as she was changing out of plant gear. The yellow lunchbox sat again in her clear tote, is waiting for the drive home. "You were at Carib Sterile, yes?" he asked. She looked up, surprised. "A long time ago." "I thought so. Your name moved in our commissioning reports. Not many people wrote with that level of detail." He paused. "You should not be wearing this badge forever." Lena zipped the tote. "Badges are mostly for doors." He considered that, and then nodded once. If you ever want introductions, ask Noor for my card. Not obligation, just accuracy. Accuracy. She liked him more for choosing that word over opportunity. When she finally reached Mrs. Baines's apartment, it was almost 6. Marisol opened the door before Lena could knock, one sock on, library book in hand, talking already about a class project on the solar system and whether Saturn would count as a gas if it had rings. Lena knelt, kissed the top of her head, and took the book before it could be dropped in the hallway. "You forgot your lunchbox," Marisol said. "I noticed." "Did you get in trouble?" Children always knew the right question first. Lena looked at her daughter's serious face, the loosened braid, the ink mark on her wrist, and thought of the atrium, the orchids, the service corridor, the room full of expensive people made suddenly silent by a truth carried in the notes of a woman they had classified as Floor. "No," she said. "Not exactly." Mrs. Baines handed over the house key and gave Lena the kind of look older women reserved for younger ones they had decided were doing their best under poor conditions. "Long day?" "Yes." "You still made it." That, too, was a kind of respect. Later, after dinner and math homework and the argument over brushing teeth that arrived every night as if new, Lena sat at the kitchen table with the plant's follow-up email open on her phone. The subject line had grown more formal since morning. Immediate quality action review. There were apologies in corporate language, invitations to provide additional information. The start of what people called recognition when they wanted it to seem administrative. She closed the email without replying. Marisol came out in socks and asked for water. Lena got it for her, tucked her back into bed, and stood for a second in the doorway, while her daughter turned onto her side and fell towards sleep with the speed of the very young and the very tired. In the dim light, the room looked assembled from small acts of persistence. The borrowed bookshelf, the folded uniforms on the chair, the taped science project poster drying above the heater. At 9:48, her phone buzzed again. A message from Noor this time, short and awkward and honest. They suspended Vale pending investigation. Also, corporate wants to know if you'd consider consulting on the deviation review. No pressure. Thank you for today. Lena read it twice, not because she was surprised by the first part, but because she was wary of the second. Institutions often tried to convert embarrassment into sudden admiration. They offered seats at tables they had spent years guarding, as if invitation erased memory. Maybe sometimes it did, not often. She typed back, "Tomorrow I can review the setup sequence before school pickup. After that, we can talk." It was enough. More than enough. The next morning, she woke again at 4:12. Rain had passed. The kitchen window reflected only the room. She sliced strawberries, packed crackers, wrapped a cheese roll, and placed everything into the yellow lunchbox with the faded planets on the lid. The zipper still caught halfway, where the blue thread thickened the pull. She worked it loose with her thumbnail. On the table beside her phone lay a new badge request form Noor had sent after midnight, pre-filled but unsigned. Temporary technical support access, a larger radius of doors. Nothing promised beyond that. Nothing declared, just a different way through the same building. Marisol patted in, rubbing one eye. "Are you going to wear the same shoes?" "Yes." "Good," her daughter said. "They're your fixing shoes." Lena smiled despite herself. "Are they?" "They sound serious." The child sat down, and Lena zipped the lunchbox shut. Ian wiped a smear of jam from the lid and slipped it into the clear tote beside her badge. Outside, the city had not transformed. The rent was still due next week. The school app would still send notices at inconvenient hours. The plant would still contain people who measured worth by title before evidence. None of that had changed overnight. But when she stood in the atrium again at 5:41, the orchids already beginning to brown at the edges, the reception clerk nodded first. A production supervisor held the elevator instead of letting it close. Noor, waiting with the revised smoke study protocol under her arm, smiled without uncertainty this time. Lena stepped inside the elevator and watched the doors begin to meet. In the mirrored panel, she caught a brief reflection. Navy scrubs, tired eyes, clear tote, yellow lunchbox, badge against her hip. No triumph, no reinvention, just the visible outline of a woman who had been valuable the entire time, whether the room had language for it or not. The doors closed. She went back to work,